For our next panel, if I could have our panelists come up, the moderator is Chris Betz, and Joe Lubin, Jake Dienelt, Matt Liston, and Preston Byrne. So this panel, we would really love it if people that have questions, we're going to have the panelists speak a bit, but we very much welcome questions. I think Mark's going to grab the microphone when we go to questions. We can bring it around to you. So while they're getting set up, let me tell you what this panel is. So I really want to do a quick show of hands for the benefit of the panelists and yourselves. How many people have heard of DAO or the DAO? Raise your hand. Okay. Wow, fantastic. Well, for those of you that don't know, DAO stands for Decentralized Autonomous Organizations. We truly have some experts in the field, and I'm really thrilled to introduce them. So get to settle there just a second, and I'll introduce our moderator. So for everyone who, and please turn your mics on. So for everyone who was here this morning, you might recognize from our first panel, Chris Betz. Over to you, Chris, for moderating the DAO panel.
Oh, that was quick. Okay. So you all know, raise your hands again if you know what a DAO is. Okay, and who knows what happened with the DAO? And who knows the difference between the two? Excellent, excellent. So what we'll run through is a couple of preliminary questions just to make sure everybody's on the same level. Then I think there are some really good foundational issues to discuss around this new technology. This is way out there as far as, you know, aggressive technology development, breaking the ground on new corporate structures, new products, new ways to do business, new funding models. So it's actually an incredible time to be talking about this. To my left is Joe Lubin at Consensys. Alongside him is Matt Liston, Preston Byrne, and Jake Dienelt. Sorry, I always get that wrong. All of them very actively involved in the community, all of them very opinionated, all of them very, very knowledgeable in what's going on. So, Matt, I just want to turn it over to you just to kind of lay the foundation for us as far as what is a DAO?
Sure. Well, first I'd say...
In a half an hour or less.
Half an hour or less. Okay, great. First, I'd start with a DAO is an evolution of a corporation or any organizational structure. It's an online entity, operates 24/7, and things like corporate bylaws, which would normally be written and arbitrated by lawyers, are replaced with a self-executing smart contract code, which lives in a blockchain. With this, you can combine different models of human organization with machine or AI organization, and you can enable things like massive ownership of an organization, massive governance, and yeah, I mean, it's not just limited to corporations. We could eventually have a nation-state DAO or a nonprofit DAO, and it's an incredibly exciting space for me.
So
probably back up and describe smart contracts and decentralized applications.
Well, I think we got
covered? Okay.
Yeah, I think we're covered on smart contracts. I assume.
What might be worth pointing out that there is one fairly successful long-run DAO, which you're all familiar with, which is Bitcoin.
Okay, so Joe, I come to you and I say I want to set up a DAO. How long? What kind of development effort is it? You know, what are these things being used for, and what do you think they'll be used for?
Sure. So at Consensys, we've had two projects, Wayfund, a crowdfunding project, and Boardroom, a governance project. And a decentralized organization or DAO could have a crowdfunding component to it, but it doesn't necessarily have to have a crowdfunding component to it. So essentially, you need a governance mechanism. The particular governance mechanism of our Boardroom product involves enabling people to be nominated as members in some way, and enabling those members to be able to table proposals and to vote on those proposals, discuss and vote on those proposals, and then if those proposals are passed, they can be enacted by human action or by the action of middleware smart contracts on the blockchain that can invoke another smart contract that accomplishes the action. So if the proposal, for instance, makes use of our token factory to issue 1 billion tokens, then middleware can be invoked to speak to that token factory and send it the correct parameters to issue those tokens.
Thanks, Joe. Preston, from your point of view, we have Ethereum on the open side. As far as Eris and the permissioned frameworks that are out there, are DAOs an important component of that?
No, DAOs, from our perspective, DAOs are an inelegant and wholly unconvincing way to commit securities fraud, speaking plainly. Basically, it's a cargo, for those of us who, I don't know, there's a thing called a cargo cult down in the South Pacific, and what happened during the Second World War was that the Americans rocked up with all this shiny machinery and airplanes and lovely things, and because we'd pushed the Japanese out, and America's the greatest country the world has ever known, when we showed up, everyone loved us, and they thought it was grand. The war ended, we left, and what was left behind were these cargo cults, as they called them. And they said, well, how do we get all this cool stuff and some Americans to come back? One of them has a savior, which is American. His name is John Frum. And they said, well, what we'll do is we'll build a runway out of just pave down some trees, and then we'll build a bamboo tower, and we'll build a plane out of bamboo. And Richard Feynman called this, these are cargo cults. And he referred to, in his discipline, a similar way of looking at science as cargo cult science. And I refer to a DAO as cargo cult law. Because basically, if you want to create an organization or a financial instrument or something else, these are all creatures which exist at law. They exist because a court recognizes they exist. They're fictions. And if you then say, well, no, we're going to have this big decentralized computer program which does it, and it's going to replicate all those functions, it doesn't quite work. It's kind of mocking it up, but it's not the same thing. So how do we look at it? We agree that some of these functions, you could certainly automate much of what a corporation does on a private blockchain, and it would be profoundly useful. Does that mean you have a new form of organizational governance that's somehow exempt from all of the rules and that you can go and issue tokens and issue coins? Absolutely not. That's hugely against the law. So that's my view on that.
So Jake, you work for Brian Kelly Capital Management as somebody who's looking at this as much from the technology point of view as an investment point of view. How do you how are people investing into these things? What are the business models behind that? And are they investing from an equity point of view, a debt point of view, a product point of view?
Well, there's all of the above. I mean, a lot of the smaller companies will have some sort of convertible debt and equity issuance. But really, frankly, there's just far too much money being invested in this space right now. It doesn't make any sense at all. But I'm okay with it. Things like the DAO, sort of an interesting way to transition into it, like the DAO, which was just not ready to be launched. And as a matter of fact, the attack that took place was being discussed in the forums like several days before the attack happened. It's interesting, I've had some friends of mine who are concerned that, this is going to have serious SEC implications, and what does it mean, and are these investments? And I think that the most important thing, well, not the most important thing, but something that it's important to understand is that you have to understand these products. The person who attacked the DAO didn't do anything wrong. They followed the code, and they took the money. It's theirs. I mean, there's an argument that they didn't have enough gas, but whatever. The point is that given that the person followed the code, is there then a protected class? If somebody is sophisticated enough to buy Bitcoin, and someone is sophisticated enough to understand Ethereum and to use their Bitcoin to buy Ethers, and then someone is sophisticated enough to read about this new product and invest their Ethers in that, are we not going to assume that they have some level of understanding of what's going on? And for that reason, investing in DAOs and things like this, which are new kinds of code, is really just kind of impossible.
Thank you. That brings up a very, very good question, which is, you have a lot of folks out there saying contract is law. I think that was debunked, throughout the day. But there is, an underlying distributed ledger sitting underneath called Ethereum, which is running these autonomous organizations, applications, and everything else. So should there be separate governance of the underlying distributed ledger technology with the contract code, no matter what the contract code is doing, whether it manifests itself as an organization, an application? How about you, Matt? What do you think?
Sure. First of all, there's sort of a two-part answer to that. One, I forget if it was you or you who mentioned that Bitcoin itself is, sort of the first DAO. So, that's a good point to bring up. There's not as much formalized smart contracts for the governance of an actual cryptocurrency, but they are, in a way, early DAOs in and of themselves. As far as for applications being built on top, and what to do if things like this happen, I think the DAO is it's sort of a wake-up call to the urgency of figuring out smart contract security methods and also sort of incremental rollout of these new types of organizations. I think that the hard fork which occurred because of the DAO, it's sort of an edge case. It shouldn't be the case where an application built on top should so severely affect the governance of the underlying platform. However, I believe that this example in particular was nearing an existential threat to Ethereum in and of itself, so it was the practical decision to be made. But going forward, we need more formalized rules for when and if we will do something like this again. Mm-hmm. And I don't expect this situation to reoccur. I think if a similar debacle happens, a different outcome will occur.
So that's the real question. How do you build the rules and get the community to follow the rules? So should a company or an open source ecosystem provide governance around security, architecture, consensus methods, whatever, and just let whatever applications are going to be running on top of it just do what they will, and if they blow up, they blow up. Joe, I'd like to get your opinion on this.
Sure. So software is made by people. Software is therefore mutable, no matter what anybody says. The consensus formation algorithm of Ethereum should prevail 99.many9% of the time. There may be circumstances, as Matt mentioned, where it is deemed by many different types of stakeholders in the ecosystem by majority that something has gone wrong at the application level, and it may require a fix at the protocol or external level. That said, I think the bar for doing another hard fork is incredibly high. I think it's incredibly unlikely that people will be naive enough to throw $150 million into an amorphous smart contract bag with no effective discussion mechanism and with terrible voting mechanisms. So I don't see Ethereum coming under existential threat for that sort of reason at any time in the future, and I think hard forks are incredibly unlikely. That said, I think it's foolish or impossible to sit down and write rules that define when a hard fork makes sense. I think this is early in the first inning of the blockchain space, and we have a lot of solution space to explore, and we're going to have to run into some snafus and figure out how to deal with those things. Over years, we'll build up layers of mechanism, I would say.
I understand what you're saying, but I really disagree. I think that the probability of hard forks has now become an inevitability. And I'm not talking about it on Ethereum, I'm talking about it on everything. There was an attack on a Bitcoin exchange recently which started a discussion, it didn't happen, but about trying to hard fork the Bitcoin protocol to reverse a theft that had happened there. And it didn't happen. People said, this is not what we want to do with the code. This isn't how we're going to do it. But if a Chinese miner was, or Chinese exchange was attacked and lost enough Bitcoin, I think there's a pretty good shot that the Bitcoin would get forked. I think that we were, you know, Joe, you said it perfectly. Software is made by people, so it's mutable. But there was this feeling that we were creating something immutable. And I think what we've now learned is that the only thing that's immutable is mutability.
Just to clarify, I'm not sure what discussions you were involved in, but a hard fork, I assume you're talking about the Bitfinex hack, a hard fork was not discussed. What was discussed very, very actively was essentially paying a whole lot of miners to essentially erase the theft transactions. And that got pretty close to getting done, actually.
Yeah, no, I know.
So here we're left with open communities, permissioned, closed communities, all trying to do a whole bunch of different things in the, you know, organizational space, the application space. So I guess, you know, coming from a Wall Street mindset, how do I proceed, right? So there's a ton of innovation in an ecosystem, building things like DAOs and decentralized apps on the open systems. There's just, you know, completely open. And then from a permission point of view, there's kind of closed. I'm worried about being part of a closed community. I want to open it up. I'm a little bit of a libertarian. So how do you balance all this, Preston?
Well, I mean, I think from a Wall Street perspective, we have to remember that every time we hear someone talking about issuing a cryptocurrency or creating a DAO with a crowdfunding component, you're looking at violations of the 1933 and 1944 Acts and the Prospectus Directive and the Financial Services and Markets Act and practically every piece of financial legislation that exists for consumer protection in the entirety of the Occident. So you're looking at conduct which you just can't do. So to a certain extent, the permissioned community is able to leverage the developments, the open source developments which are happening in the public blockchain sector. But equally, they're also making their own improvements. For example, Jay Kwan was up on stage earlier. The Tendermint Consensys engine is much more performant than virtually anything else out there, which is why we use it. So it's not like you're saying, oh, well, you know, we're suddenly closed off. This is a telecommunications tool, a blockchain. You can communicate with anyone who's running a node and has a private key and has permission for that system. The question is, what kind of communication do you want to engage in? So people say private blockchain as if it's this walled garden. No, you can create as many of them as you want. You can talk to whomever you want. You can automate whatever process you can describe in code. So I don't quite buy that it's a closed ecosystem, A. B, everything that's worth a damn is open source under Apache or GPL3. So how do you do it? The first answer is, what's your regulatory compliance obligation? And we know what the answer to that is already, which means you've basically discounted the public chains as a viable option for you. And then, you know, what do? You observe the creativity of what's going on in the public chain space, but you certainly can't embrace it, and I don't recommend embracing it.
So, you know, we were, I was watching with interest the panel with Mark Smith at Symbiont and how, you know, the state of Delaware is getting very, very actively engaged to create a valid corporate architecture that is immutable on a blockchain, accessible, et cetera, ad infinitum. But I guess the key fundamental difference here is that those are records, right? Those are, that is part of a statement of record. You're not then allowing that statement of record to engage in transactions with a counterparty. That's something completely separate.
You're basically putting the statement of record into a context which a court will understand. So for all intents and purposes, yes, you haven't invented some new legal fiction called a DAO, which has powers to do various things. You have to drop it within the existing fictitious but binding frameworks we already have.
So guys, is it what it is, or is it what it does? Is that the issue?
Yes.
Matt, you like to take a shot?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't completely understand.
In other words, you know, what it is, you know, it's an organization, right? We can form an organization 100 different ways, in 100 different jurisdictions, no problem. So is the issue with what it does. So I guess that's leading to the question is this DAO a misnomer to begin with? You know?
I don't necessarily see an issue with either. I think it's not necessarily something that exists in a previous framework. It's, like I said, the evolution of the corporation, not a slightly different corporation. And it exists in a different sovereignty framework than local jurisdictions.
So what sovereignty framework can I, hook into?
One that we're inventing now, one that's global, lives on a blockchain, is executed using smart contracts, and I disagree with Preston, but one thing that he's saying is that it's necessary to have these open blockchains for innovation. Well, we need to do this. If we don't do this, then he's not going to have the toolkits to do the private blockchains.
We forked you a long time ago.
Joe?
So what it does is defined by the code. So I think that's pretty clear. What it is depends on your perspective or the level of analysis. Certain elements of the Ethereum community believe what it is what it does. So code is law. Other elements of the Ethereum community believe that there was explicit understanding or implicit understandings, and what it is or what it was wasn't strictly defined by what it did. If you take it out into a legal context, some lawyers would probably argue that it was a general partnership, and that there's a duty of care that should be applied by all general partners to their partners. And in that context, it was essentially a crime or a transgression against the agreement that everybody implicitly signed on to when they participated in the DAO.
So was that a legally binding agreement?
Well,
It
contracts can
ousted
be
the
verbal.
jurisdiction of the court. I mean, it said it wasn't intended to be legally binding and said the court that code is law. So it ousted the jurisdiction of the court, which means when presented to a court, the court is going to do what it wants.
Right.
And so that's not good. Usually that's a very bad thing. So that's my read on it.
So I just want to, before we open it up to questions, so where does this go from here? What is being worked on today? What's your gut tell you? What are the great things that are happening in this domain that you think will kind of wipe the slate clean and really launch, these initiatives forward? You guys?
The DAO was a great event for our ecosystem. It drew a ton of attention. Hundreds of thousands or millions of people became aware of Ethereum. It drew a ton of attention from security researchers. So we've been speaking to a bunch of researchers, cybersecurity researchers that were drawn to the space. It has caused us to re-intensify our focus on security across the Ethereum ecosystem. And it essentially raised the issue of what is immutability and triggered some very vigorous debates. And essentially provided potentially the first serious threat to Ethereum and enabled Ethereum to demonstrate, maybe for the first time, a little bit of anti-fragility.
And what do you guys think? Is there a future here? Can you see where this construct would work? And, is there a future here? Because I think you guys are a little bit more on the doubting side.
We wrote a DAO in 2014, and what we did is we put in two things that apparently they forgot about in the intervening years. One of those was a manual override to kill it if in the event that something like this happened, and the other one was you dropped it into a 501c6 nonprofit corporation, which was a trade association. So what you do is you look at it as what it is. It's software instead of a corporation. Software that runs a corporation, not software that is a corporation. So I think the future of this is in that. I think the DAO, these blockchains are extremely good at reconciling data sets with huge amounts of people. That can include voting intention for shareholders or things like that, which normally is done manually at a bondholder meeting or a shareholder meeting or something like that. So I think eventually that's where it will wind up. Startups like Boardroom, for example, which is part of the Consensys stable, I think they'll wind up doing that.
I can tell you that from a perspective of looking at it and investing, I think that at this point, the next if somebody tries to take one of these networks and put a whole nother platform on it and ask for a whole bunch of money and not specify exactly what they're doing and have a whole bunch of weird contradictory warnings on it, it's probably not going to get very much investment. I think that, however, there is one saving grace that is going to continue to make it so that people don't go to jail, which is that there, as I said earlier, is way too much money in this space. And so most things will keep going up, and you're just not going to have any injured investors to protect.
That's great. So I'd like to open it up for questions. You got some of the most innovative professionals at your fingertips here, so have at it. No softballs, please.
Hi, thank you. So I have a question about the DAO, of course, which is if code is law, then like in real life, if there's a law saying, say, I'm not supposed to take bagels, if I take bagels, there's no consensus mechanism that says it's wrong. It's like if it's argued in a court of law, where it's not done by voting mechanism, it's done by way of lawyers arguing back and forth and decide what to do. So if code is law, I'm not saying it is, but if it is, shouldn't there be like crypto lawyers and a crypto court where instead of people on discussion forums or blogs discussing whether to hard fork or not, you have an actual structured process like in a court of law with precedents of how to debate on these issues and how to get to a final decisions, and where everybody who has a stake in the system does not get to have a vote because everybody is not equipped to talk about law in a way that some people can, who are lawyers, who have studied this thing and who have a lot of historical information that like lay people do not have. So a kind of social class among Ethereum users who are crypto lawyers and who get to discuss this with crypto judges and who get to decide that. Because
Juries are a consensus method. They're
Sorry?
not Byzantine fault tolerant. Juries. We do have people that vote on things that happen in the law.
No, I know, but I mean like the process of deciding on this thing shouldn't be, if it's law, shouldn't be in a way that
It isn't though. It's
So
not, it's code.
there is great value in putting business processes embodied in smart contracts on a blockchain. You can essentially create state transition graphs, and you can sign off at different aspects of the business process. You're only really going to be able to accomplish 99-point-something% of the happy path through that. There will always be edge cases, exceptions, and so when you're doing business on the blockchain, you should have things like arbitration mechanisms and potentially some sort of recourse to the legal system. So you are correct. There will be a lot of justice mechanisms or resolution mechanisms on the blockchain built over time. But the valuable thing is that the 99.9% happy path will make things very, very inexpensive compared to how they are now.
Okay.
I think we have one question here on the other side.
A lot of questions.
So I want to ask you about the involvement of Ethereum Foundation and how the efforts that Ethereum as a team has put into the hard fork and the potential conflict of interest given the large amount of DAO tokens held by people that are involved in the Ethereum project. And that kind of like, and I mean, I don't know if hello? And I did lose tokens, DAO tokens, but in a way, I also lost a little bit of faith in this idea of immutability of a record. And I lost like $2,000, no big deal, but maybe if I had $2 million, I would be in favor of the hard fork. So like I can see a little bit of a conflict and say, well, maybe this happened because people had like large holdings in the DAO. And what's your opinion on it?
So let me discuss my situation first. I never owned a DAO token. I never shorted a DAO token. I was disturbed about it early on and didn't really track it in detail until I was woken up at 4:30 in the morning on that particular night. I would say the majority of the people who are currently working for the foundation initially felt that there should be no fork, soft fork or hard fork. And it was discussed over a few days, and we identified some significant existential threats that would basically create a cesspool of Ethereum for potentially 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. And so it was deemed that it might just be an existential threat. Certainly there were people who worked for the foundation, who worked on the DAO and owned DAO tokens. My feeling is that they owned far, far more Ether, and that from knowing those people, I believe that their personal financial interest didn't affect their decision to pursue the hard fork path.
So my question is a bit about the ecosystem and the structure around it in terms of what is going to be possible in terms of future-proofing this ecosystem. You know, we talk about the fact that the only thing that is immutable is mutability. That also means that if we were to be 50 years in the past, the cryptography and the state of the art at that time doesn't stand up to computational power that we have nowadays to be able to crack it, change it,
Yeah,
and
but
modify it.
cryptographers and cryptanalysts have gone back and forth since Mary Queen of Scots. I
Oh,
mean,
absolutely, and even back to
and
Roman
yet
times.
cipher was
So-
unbreakable. Like,
I think the way you do that is you make sure that you're not dependent on any one system frozen in time. I mean, so if we look at Bitcoin as our prime example, the great global money machine that gets 2.4 transactions per second has proven somewhat underwhelming compared to the newer tech such as Tendermint or Ripple or various other ones which are getting several thousand. So if you're a bank and you want to go deploy a process automation and God knows what, and you're running it on a private Tendermint chain, and 5 years from now you decide, oh, hey, there's this new, Marmot 2.0 crypto that we're going to use, so we're going to use that instead. Then you go, okay, cool, we'll just take the state, snapshot, port, start, off you go. If, however, you choose to use the public chain ecosystem, that's designed differently, so you're going to be exposed to a different set of risk factors.
Yeah, so Bitcoin was conceived as an experiment in monetary theory, and it is a payment system and money, effectively. And I think it makes sense that the core developers are taking a slow, prudent approach to evolving that system. Ethereum, from the start, was designed as a decentralized application platform. So we didn't think of it as money, we thought of it as software, basically. And so we have a pretty aggressive roadmap for taking Ethereum version 1, which is really, it's scalable enough for the next couple, 3 years, but it's not scalable for a significant amount of the world's transactions, let's say. And so it's a well-defined roadmap, and we've already hard forked once, just to move from Frontier to Homestead. That's not counting the DAO hard fork, and that's going to keep happening every year or so. That said, it's early in the first inning, and the solution space is vast, and there are a lot of smart people coming into the space, and the space will be explored.
Okay, I think we have time for 2 more questions. Go on.
With the precedent of the DAO hard fork and now there being essentially Ethereum and Ethereum Classic, when Ethereum is looking to do another hard fork, do you think that there's going to be any risk that people are financially incentivized to oppose updates just to kind of create a third currency that's tradable and all of that?
Yes.
yeah, but not really. I mean, yes, but we're talking about the Metropolis, which is like a graphics interface, which it's hard to get done because that's not what hardcore devs want to work on. But Serenity, the big update to Ethereum, which is what really makes Ethereum come into what it is supposed to be. The idea that you would hard fork into a version of Ethereum that didn't include sharding, state channels, and proof of stake and leave it the way it was is, I don't think there's really any value in that.
I would have agreed with you a while ago, but it's become clear to us that there are many different kinds of actors in our space now with many different agendas.
We are all here to
One
make
of the
money.
One of the leadership of one of the main exchanges in our space basically had the idea to start buying Ether Classic very early on because, and it's quasi-quote, he said something like, an alt Ethereum is a much better shitcoin than all the other shitcoins that you can make millions of dollars on.
Good compliment.
Yeah, exactly.
There are some workarounds which they could have implemented but didn't. For example, dropping in a chain ID into the hard fork chain. So not that I have any idea what that means, but the developers who work at Eris Industries do. So I suspect on the next hard fork they might do something like that.
One more question.
I wanted to dig into something second from the left said, which is that, sorry?
Jake?
Jake. That the DAO attack wasn't really an attack or a hack. It was somebody following the rules in an unintended way and got their money. First of all, did I get that right? Or
It was an attack.
Sure.
I mean, the guy was taking money, but he's basically the only person in the world that read the terms of service.
Fine, but no, but okay, fine. But when I say it's not an attack, I mean he didn't do something fraudulent or illegal.
Yeah, yes, he did.
Against, well, sorry, the entire DAO being granting Preston's point that the entire DAO is fraudulent and illegal.
No. The theft was fraudulent as well. So it was fraud within a fraud. It was like
within
it was a
the
fraud
terms of the DAO, this attacker did something that was allowed.
No.
It had
He didn't have enough of the tokens to continue to pull more money out. It's what's called a recursive call.
right.
Well, he stopped because Vitalik threatened to fork. He could have kept going forever.
No, I know, but he didn't, that's because, like, the way it works is like if you put your ATM card into a bank machine,
Yeah.
and it says that you have a $200 balance, and you take out $200, and then it says, would you like to do anything else? And you say, what's my balance? And it still says $200.
Yeah.
And you keep taking out $200.
Well, correct.
Well,
The
Still-
statute, but the statutory.
Am I liable for that?
The statutory definition of theft is exercising the rights of an owner over some property which causes loss to another or gain to another, a third party. So to the extent that the terms of the DAO were not written down with any degree of specificity, which they were not, it is possible that those who were members of the DAO could have looked at it and said, well, I own this, and that was not something to which I consented, and the attacker should have known that, and he should have known that because it's unconscionable to think that he would have done otherwise. Therefore, that was very classically theft, even if all this garbage about code is law, which is legally, every lawyer I've spoken to says exactly the same thing. It's garbage.
yeah,
It's
I agree that legally he did, but if we're going to look at what I'm talking about is within the DAO's own definition, and Ethereum's own definition of what the law was supposed to be.
How different was what happened with DAO than what happened to the housing market, where an unintended consequence
Way
of
different.
illegal activity led to a hard fork in 2008? We're not going to let this play out. I mean, how?
A hard fork in 2008?
We're not going to let the
You mean
entire economy
FASB
collapse.
256?
We're going to break.
Mark to fantasy
Was there?
rather than mark to market?
Yeah.
Absolutely, that's a hard fork.
Okay.
To hard
Damn,
fork.
just when we were getting the
right now.
conversation going.
So
Hard
right
fork
now,
back to the old state.
But yeah, I'd just like to take a moment and thank these guys. I think we're going to have a break in a few minutes. So, I'd just like to thank all you guys, and I'm glad I had the honor of sitting on the stage with you. Thank you.